We've been talking a lot this morning around ecosystems and startups. We've not touched on the topic of AI yet. And so for this next panel, we're going to be, it's called AI is not a panacea in drug discovery yet. And so I'd like to welcome Mobeen Lalani, Manager of Technology and Venture Development at TIAP, to the stage. And he's going to be hosting a panel on important considerations for building AI drug development companies.
Thank you for the introduction, Maisha. I really appreciate it. I'm really excited to be moderating this panel. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. We're here today to talk about a topic that's generating massive excitement and a fair bit of skepticism. And across the life science and tech world, this is known as AI in drug discovery. And I'm thrilled to be here moderating this panel. The promise is clear, right? It's going to be faster, it's going to be cheaper, and more precise drug development. We love that. Startups in this space have and continue to raise massive capital, and even pivoting from just being tool providers to now having drug development programs. And as the session says, AI isn't a panacea, at least not yet. So despite the breakthroughs, AI drug discovery companies still face massive hurdles, and we're going to talk about that today. I want to introduce our panelists today, Alexander Mosa, Chair and CSO of Biossil, Janet Bannister, Managing Partner at Fazekas Ventures, and Anthony de Fazekas, Partner at Mintz.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah. So I've been told that the 30 minutes pass fairly quickly, and so let's get right into it. First question is for you, Alex. Take us through Biossil. Take us through what makes Biossil different, and what are you currently working on?
Sure. Can you hear me okay without the microphone? No?
No.
What about now?
Yeah.
Mic check? Okay, great. So thanks for the question. I think there's really three principal differences between Biossil and the sort of peer AI drug discovery companies that aggregate in one thematic difference. So the first is that most AI drug discovery companies are focused on identifying new targets through new models of biology. We focus on identifying underappreciated, previously identified targets that might be more relevant in one disease subgroup than another. The second is that most of these peer groups will be focused on developing physiochemical models or structural models for drug discovery, whereas we focus on semantic models. The third is that these groups are typically focused on developing models with the promise of ultimately applying them in the future, whereas we are currently dosing patients and have multiple phase 3 trials in 2025 and others in 2026. And so what these aggregate in thematically is that most groups are focused on applying new methods to a traditional process, whereas we are trying to develop a new process for drug development.
And so diving a little deeper into that, how does your platform work to uncover biologically defined subpopulations and target rare diseases? And maybe you can use a use case or an application to speak on that.
Sure. So we don't only focus on rare disease, and the approach is conceptually relatively straightforward. It is not contentious that there is tremendous variability in disease and among disease populations. When this heterogeneity is reproducible, durable, and clinically meaningful, we call them phenotypes. And sometimes they are used in clinical practice to identify which treatments would be optimal for a given patient. Less appreciated is that many of these phenotypes are actually predicated on molecular variability that are sometimes called endotypes. And this molecular variability can account for convergence between two distinct diseases in that they have a shared pathophysiology, in which case drug repurposing sometimes work. Similarly, it can sometimes amount in a divergence where a single disease has multiple relevant pathophysiologies that are not all active in every patient. We're focused on this latter. And so what we aim to do is model these endotypes or this disease variability and identify drugs that work better for some groups than others and acquire them, bring them back into trials. So one application of this has been in our work in sickle cell disease. It's been understood for almost 2 decades that there is phenotypic variability in sickle cell disease, primarily in the rates of hemolysis or breakdown of blood cells and the rates of pain. But these have not been systematized into durable endotypes that can be used to identify patients, which is what we did and acquired a drug and have brought it back for hemolytic dominant sickle cell disease. And what's intriguing about this example is a monogenetic rare disease is probably the last place that you would expect there to be meaningful variability, but clearly there is.
Thank you so much, Alex. Now, to back your science, a lot goes into it, and one side of it, one of the most important sides of it, is capital. And so, Janet, this next question is for you. Having invested in Biossil and looking at other life science companies, when you're looking at these opportunities that are presented to you, how are you evaluating these deals? What are some of the early indicators that you're looking for to look at the success and how it will be successful?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I'll just say it's great to be here, so thanks very much. Great to see everybody. So Staircase Ventures, what we do is we lead seed stage rounds in business-to-business software companies, and a lot of those companies have an AI focus. So while we are not specifically in the life sciences sector, we actually have 2 companies that are involved in improving the process by which drugs get to market. One is Biossil. Super proud of the fact that we did the first investment round into Biossil. Love working with Alex and his co-founder, Anthony. And then the other company that we've invested in that's also in this space is a company called Banting AI. And Banting is using AI to help with the clinical research process and make that much more efficient. And so in terms of what we look at, so we do a wide variety of AI investments. What we look for in terms of the characteristics of companies that we invest in within AI is a verticalized application in which the tech incumbents do not have an obvious right to win. And so I think the companies that we have articulated, both Biossil and Banting, fit that model. We also look for companies that have a long-term sustainable competitive moat, either through having unique data sets, proprietary relationships, network effects, or other factors. And then the final thing we look for is a clear path to monetization. And so I think we are looking, therefore, at great companies that are in this sector, yes, but really looking at them through an AI lens and how are they using AI to dramatically change the outcomes.
Thank you. And Anthony, I'd like for you to comment on the idea of the monetization, the business model, and ask you, why is the business model so critical to legal structuring and IP strategies?
Sure, thanks. So one of the things about the business models is, in this sector specifically, is that they tend to vary sometimes over time. So you see a lot of companies in AI drug discovery where they start by providing access to really unique expertise, for example, to pharma companies, while they build up a platform. And then some of them, Biossil is doing this from the very beginning, actually going after the big money, which is actually owning the drug programs themselves. But you do see this change from one to the other, or pivoting, or maybe it's a planned change over time. But in each of those cases, the nature of the assets that are being created, the approach that the company has to have around data is going to be really different, and the IP strategy is going to be different too. So for example, in Biossil's case, because they're developing drug programs, and oftentimes there is freedom to operate that they have to navigate, they really need to have a playbook on how they're going to approach each drug program, let alone all those different business models. So I guess the lesson there is, it's a really interesting area, but from a regulatory, like a health regulatory, legal structure, and a IP point of view, you really do need to have a playbook so that you efficiently can manage these risks and these opportunities as you pivot. And that requires a discussion of the business model rather than this reactive approach, which becomes cumbersome and expensive.
So doubling down on this idea of having a playbook, Alex, this question's for you. What are some of the challenges that you foresee when it comes to IP bottlenecks? And maybe in parallel to that, more generally, what are some of the challenges that you see when translating molecule to program? And if you can talk about some of those challenges more generally.
Sure. So I think it's distinct depending on the stage at which you are developing a molecule. Early stage development is really challenging space because there's a great amount of uncertainty, but very meaningful capital costs, and a lot of bias from inventors. And so this is something kind of, I've confronted coming out of the lab myself. One of the things that I think has been most pernicious is that a lot of the IP is held by universities and other, frankly, non-motivated actors. And so it can be very challenging to liberate intellectual property that is valuable from institutions or institutions where the individuals acting as agents for those institutions may not see any immediate upside to getting a deal done in September versus the next January. And of course, time is a really critical determinant here because access to capital is time dependent. And so I would really say that the main barrier is liberating useful IP from dormant actors.
Thank you. And Anthony, I'd like from the legal side, legal structuring side, I'd like for you to also comment on not only data leaks and data preservation, but also what are successful startups doing in this space that you perhaps want to call out for those early stage companies to look out for or build on?
Well, I think one of the things that they're doing in this space is they're drawing really early on a line between what they're going to patent and what they're going to protect as a trade secret. I mean, that's always an issue in any innovative business, but particularly where there's challenges in patenting, because we're talking about software tools a lot of times,
right.
You have to have a clear eye on what the opportunities really are. And sometimes, especially if the company in this space is technology first, there's a tendency to just shy away from patents altogether, which sometimes is not the right approach, particularly if then a competitor grabs the patents that the venture, the startup should have probably grabbed. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing related to that is a lot of times there's this, well, we're relying on trade secrets, but especially these days, given that there's legislation in the US around trade secrets, you really have to have a formal trade secrets management program in order to protect those assets, but also to show those assets to acquirers and investors and so on. And so things like creating a trade secrets register processes to identify those trade secrets and then better manage them, including through contracts if you're disclosing, let's say, really unique expertise to your pharma partner. What are the protections that are in place in those cases? So that's the second thing. The third thing, and also related, is contracts, right? So I think a lot of times there are ventures who do a really good job around various aspects of IP, but the weak point is the contract. So giving a little bit too much away, rather than trying to find a win-win type agreement, especially with pharma, which, by the way, you can find. Like, there's some really interesting deals that are done where AI drug discovery company has almost like traditional pharma licensing deals with milestones and royalties and things like that, where they're the ones that really identify the target, or without their platform, there wouldn't be that drug program within pharma. So those are the key things that come to mind.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I want to take a little bit of pivot because obviously Canada rocks, right? Canada is the best place to be. And I want to focus a little bit about the importance of what's happening in AI in Canada. And so there's something that you said, Janet, on the call that I appreciated. And it was, you brought up the idea of enablers and challengers. And so I want you to kind of explain that a little bit and kind of share with the audience what that means, but also where you think Canada should lean more on.
Absolutely. So the model, the framework of challengers versus enablers, I first heard it in the context of fintechs, right? So you think about financial service startups, and there are two, basically they fall into two groups. One are enablers. Enablers are selling software to the existing large players to help those large banks or other financial institutions be more efficient, improve their marketing, improve their risk underwriting, etc. Those are the enablers. And then there are challengers, who are the challengers who are going up against the big financial institutions who are challenging the status quo. These could be banks like a Coho or a Neo that are going directly to consumers, or insurance companies that are, starting from scratch and going directly to whether it's big businesses or consumers. And so taking that mindset, it was interesting. Probably 18 months ago, I was out walking with Anthony, Alex's co-founder, and we were talking about the company, and he was sharing their thoughts around it. And I said to him, Anthony, what's really interesting is if you think of almost all of the work that has been done in the drug industry, all the AI work and all the technology, a lot of that has been enablers rather than challengers. And what I mean by that are there are companies, so for instance, I was on the, invested in and was on the board of Biossil, awesome Canadian company that is selling software to drug companies to help with their drug discovery process. Or there are other companies that, biotech companies that are developing drugs, many of whom then sell those drugs to the existing drug companies. And what they're doing is they are just in helping to entrench the massive drug companies. And there's not many players that are fundamentally saying we're going to change the rules of the game. And when I spoke with Alex and Anthony about what they were doing, I said, what you are doing is you're fundamentally changing the game. You are changing how drugs are being brought to market. And to me, I think that that is extremely exciting because the current framework in which drugs are developed and brought to market is not sustainable. The time to develop a drug has been increasing significantly. It can now be 10 to 15 years. The costs of developing a drug, the average drug can I've heard quotes from $1 to $3 billion. And not only that, just in terms of the price of drugs, so since over the last 40 years, the price of prescription drugs has increased every year on average at 3x the rate of inflation, which means that over that 40-year period, the adjusted real cost of prescription drugs is 5x what that was 40 years ago. Today, 15% of the healthcare spending in Canada goes to prescription drugs, and that is increasing. Like we need to address that issue. And so in terms of how, if you ask me, hey, Jan, where do you think that we should be focusing as Canadians, I would love to see more of these companies that are saying, hey, like let's shake up the status quo. Let's shake up the status quo of large drug companies focused on developing large mega blockbuster drugs that are extremely expensive, take a long time to get to market, and are just entrenching the existing players, and let's develop new ways. And that's exactly what Biossil is doing.
I love that. I appreciate that. And I think Biossil is a perfect example. And so, Alex, I want to double down on what Janet said, but in real time. So you mentioned something called the Canadian advantage, and you've doubled down using that Canadian advantage to your advantage. Maybe talk about what that advantage is and how early stage founders can also use it or double down in that rather than going down south and leveraging the capital and what comes with. You've been able to raise and use that Canadian advantage to your side. So maybe speak on that.
Yeah, so to clarify, it's a bit of a vague concept, but I do want to emphasize that the capital still has to really come from
Absolutely.
the U.S. Where we are now, and I can speak to that. And our capital mostly does come from the U.S. The advantage is really that we have a fairly homogeneous healthcare system, and as such, the standards of care do not diverge as widely in Canada as they do in the US. And so there are advantages to running clinical trials if what you're trying to do are isolate variables that have led to trial failure in the past, like deviation, for example, in individual hospital protocols. The other thing is simply cost. So when we run a trial at Boston's Children's Hospital, every patient enrolled is maybe $25,000 or $30,000 US. Whereas in Canada, it's maybe 10,000 Canadian dollars. So in instances where you can feasibly run your trial largely in Canada, the cost savings are tremendous. And of course, Canada is the only jurisdiction in the world that the FDA actually accepts data at parity. So there is I would say some underutilized advantages to running trials in Canada. But again, that doesn't extend, I don't believe, to the capital and growth size of the business.
And Anthony, maybe you can also comment here. What's limiting homegrown AI and drug discovery programs or services or tools to grow and scale from a legal and IP perspective?
Well, maybe I'll take it not from a legal IP perspective, but I think we, in Canada, and some of the other speakers talked about this, I think when we look at companies in this space, we're often doing comparatives, to their peers. And what we see is that you see it sometimes objectively in the IP, that the counterparts of Canadian companies in this space and other innovative spaces are more ambitious. You can see in how they're approaching their filings what their strategy is. They're more aggressive, they're putting more money into it, and various speakers have already said that. The other thing that I think we could turn from a disadvantage into advantage is unique sets of data. So, we've been waiting for maybe the governments to do something around this. Maybe it's not going to happen. But in Canada, we're very good at collaborating and setting up all kinds of multi-stakeholder type arrangements. Various of the speakers come from organizations that exemplify that in the Toronto ecosystem. I think we should take that approach at large scale in data. And so, and we have examples outside of life sciences where this has been done, maybe more quietly. We've seen it in animal health and telematics, predictive maintenance. So the idea is that it could be an institution, but it could even just be a company that says, you know what, we're going to encourage more people to contribute data by providing clear rules and regulations around what the pooling arrangement's going to be and how there's win-win through different data that comes back to you or sharing of insights. So you can kind of look at what the objectives are. You can design a strategy around that and then set up relatively simple agreements so everybody kind of comes on. So that's the type of thing that I'd like to see Canada do more of, because I think it's in the nature of our culture. And so we can build these unique data sets and data pools that I think it'll give another commercial advantage to our companies.
Thank you. I want to pivot onto another topic that a lot of people are thinking about, early stage companies are thinking about a lot, and it's funding and strategic capital. Alex, this question is for you. You've been able to unlock capital and substantial capital from VC funds in the US, like the Founders Fund. And so I'm curious to know, what did that unlock for you? And if you have any anecdotes from that experience.
Sure. I think the sort of the most critical thing it does, other than unlock a scale of capital that's not accessible to sort of non-tier one funds, sort of frankly, is a sort of a confidence and a pedigree to operate at the level where you'll be competitive in a space where there are enormous rounds, and capital is becoming a moat for many of these nascent businesses. And so, there is, unfortunately, we may like to believe that science and commercial opportunities are evaluated on first principles, but oftentimes it is shorthand thinking and biases and brand. And there's something very meaningfully different about two companies with the same founders, the same balance sheet, the same drugs, when one of them is backed by Founders Fund or Sequoia or Andreessen, and the other is backed by sort of an oligarch or just capital, but not with the pedigree. And part of that is investors don't want to look foolish, and venture capital is challenging because you're operating at a frontier, and you could be mistaken for being naive if you misallocate capital. And that naivete is damaging for future deal flow and raising future rounds. And venture capitalists are trying to attenuate that risk. And the best way for them to attenuate that risk is to collateralize it and basically operate in some sense like a shared decision network, almost a culture. And there are leaders in that culture, and the leaders are the investors who have consistently, delivered multi-billion-dollar returns. And so
just carrying on that, what is some kind of tangible advice that you can give to entrepreneurs that are trying to raise in this environment, and specifically with those who are trying to attract large funds, as the one that you did?
I tend to not like the advice because I think it unfairly ascribes more to luck than is fair. A huge amount of this is just luck, meeting the right people at the right time, nothing that we specifically did. The caution I would provide to sort of go back to that idea that venture capital is like a culture. I mean, it's a social enterprise, it's cultural, and most cultures have fashions. And as a company, you're kind of evaluated by your conformity to the fashion. And you never really know if the right move is to kind of, create or craft a brand and a narrative for yourself that is consistent with the dominant fashion, or in fact to stick out. And you don't really know until you're out on the street and people either think that you look awkward or they think that you look innovative. So probably the best thing you could do is just engage and try to get those no's racked up early.
When it comes to raising in strategic capital, I'd like for either of you to kind of share what you think.
Yeah, so I guess my advice for any founders who are looking at capital is a couple of things. First and foremost, one of the things I like to tell founders is that capital is a means to an end, not an end in itself. And what I mean by that is you need to start with thinking about what is the business you're going to build. Do you have the right team? Do you have the right strategy? Do you have a long-term competitive advantage? And then figure out, okay, based on that, how much capital do I need? And who's the best partner to raise from? And once you raise that capital, you need to understand that that is not the end game, which I think, unfortunately, our media often portrays. Hey, this company raised so much money from this firm. Wow, this is all great. And I always say, I grew up, I was a competitive runner, and so I sort of sometimes use running analogies. And I often say to my founders, hey, you know what? The fact that you just raised a lot of money from a great firm just means that you're at the next level of a race, right? You went from the city finals to the metros to the provincials to the nationals to the worlds, and guess what? You just got on the starting line of the next race, and it's an even faster race. So I think understanding capital is a way to build your business, and then really thinking about, hey, who are the capital partners who are going to be a great fit for my business, who have the right thesis, the right value add, and are going to help me get to my end goals.
Yeah. Anthony,
Maybe try not to do it so alone. I do find, because we act for a lot of startups and scale-ups, and we also at the same time have over 1,000 VC clients, particularly in the US, I'm surprised by how few companies reach out to us for our help on the fundraising side. And I think some tips on people that do this really well is they share their lists of these are the people that we're approaching, and they send us monthly updates on this is what we're looking for, this is how we're thinking, this is how the business has changed. And I'm sometimes surprised by how few companies do that. But then the ones that do, I think they're doing that with their entire sort of group of friends that are helping the venture. And I think particularly we're in an undercapitalized ecosystem in many ways. I think those strategies become all the more important. And then the last thing is that we've been chatting about this at the various conferences that are happening this week. So it'd be good to get the pension funds on side. I think that's what's at the end of everybody's lips right now. And so, sometimes I think we have to come together as a community to make those types of things happen as well. So crowdsourcing.
Appreciate that. So let's end. We have just a couple of minutes left. Let's end with a lightning round in one sentence or two. What's one big change you'll see in the space, or you think you'll see in the space in the next 5 years, let's say? We'll start with Janet.
I hope that we see disruption to the current model of drug discovery, as I talked about drug discovery testing. I hope that we see much more precision medicine.
Yeah.
I think it's mostly going to be status quo. There's not going to be very durable technological moats, and Big Pharma is going to consolidate most of the value of the technology coming out now.
I think more sort of thoughtful collaborations between startups and pharma companies. I think pharma companies are open to them, but I think the startups need to ask for them and be careful in their negotiation of them, because that in and of itself, I think, will bring some of the disruption that Janet's talking about.
That's fantastic. And here we have the panel come to the close. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Yeah, thank you to the panelists for being here. Thank you. Maisha, over to you.